America is enormous. 3.8 million square miles, 50 states, and most people can name maybe a dozen towns in the whole country. Scattered across all that land are places most Americans have never heard of. A town where you have to drive through Canada just to reach your own house. A 9-person patch of Kentucky stranded by an earthquake 200 years ago. A former mining boomtown of up to 20,000 people, evacuated because the ground itself was poisoning children. And one place that has been on fire for over 60 years, not metaphorically, underground right now while you're watching this. That's number 1 on this list, and the detail about what a gas station owner found in his fuel tank is the reason it made the top spot. Welcome to the channel where we go looking for the corners of the map nobody thinks to check. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time because we post stories like this every week. Today, we're counting down 10 of the strangest, most forgotten places inside the United States. Number 10, Buford, Wyoming. The town you could buy on eBay. In 2012, an entire American town went up for auction. Not a house, not a ranch, the whole town. Buford sits along Interstate 80 between Cheyenne and Laramie, at close to 8,000 feet elevation. By the time of that auction, it had exactly one resident. His name was Don Salmons. He'd lived there since 1980, and for the better part of 3 decades, he was the whole population, owner, mayor, and sole employee of the local gas station. Buford started out in 1866 as a railroad camp during construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, and it briefly held close to 2,000 people. Then the railroad's route shifted, and the town simply drained out over the following century until it was down to Salmons, his wife, and eventually just Salmons alone. When his wife passed and his son moved out, he decided it was time to go. Instead of just selling the house, he put the entire town up for public auction. 10 acres, a 3-bedroom home, a 1905 schoolhouse, a gas station, and its own zip code. Bidders from dozens of countries showed interest. The winning bid came in at $900,000 from a man who had never set foot in the United States before flying in specifically to buy it. The whole auction took 11 minutes. The new owner turned the gas station into an outlet for Vietnamese coffee. As of the last census, Buford's official population is 0. Somewhere in Wyoming, there's a town with its own zip code and nobody lives there at all. Number 9, Rachel, Nevada. The UFO capital nobody planned. Rachel has 48 residents according to the last census, and it didn't set out to become famous. It started in the 1970s as a tungsten mining camp in the middle of Nevada's Great Basin Desert, isolated by design. Here's the thing. It just happened to sit closest to a military base the government wouldn't even acknowledge existed. In 1989, a man named Bob Lazar went public with claims that he'd worked on reverse-engineered alien technology near Groom Lake, the facility people now call Area 51. Rachel was the only inhabited town anywhere near it, so it absorbed the resulting wave of UFO tourists almost by accident. Locals leaned into it instead of fighting it. In 1996, Nevada officially renamed the highway running past town the Extraterrestrial Highway. The town's central business, the Little Ale Inn, is part motel, part restaurant, part alien-themed bar, and it's still the community's only real gathering place. Parts of the 1996 film Independence Day were shot here, and there's a time capsule from the production sitting outside the inn to prove it. The strangest verified detail has nothing to do with aliens at all. In 1986, a Norwegian Air Force pilot crashed his F-16 during a training run, coming down between the trailer park and the town playground. He survived. Afterward, he mailed the town his squadron patches as a thank you. Rachel is named after the first child born there, back in 1978. The town has never had a post office, which, for a place built on secrecy and government silence, feels about right. These days, it's just as well known for something that never landed. Number 8, Kentucky Bend, Kentucky. The Peace of Kentucky and earthquake stranded. To drive from Kentucky Bend to the rest of Kentucky, you first have to leave the state entirely. 9 people live here according to the last census in a patch of Fulton County completely encircled by Missouri and Tennessee. Locals have a few names for it: New Madrid Bend, or simply Bubble Land, a little bubble of Kentucky floating inside 2 other states. Their mailing address is in Tiptonville, Tennessee. There is no bridge, no direct road, nothing physically connecting this land to the rest of the state that technically owns it. The reason goes back to 1811 and 1812, when a series of earthquakes along the New Madrid Fault, among the most powerful ever recorded in the continental United States, violently reshaped the course of the Mississippi River. The quakes reportedly reversed the river's flow for a time and carved out Reelfoot Lake in nearby Tennessee. In the chaos, surveyors working out the Kentucky-Tennessee border ended up drawing a line that crossed the Mississippi twice, based on where the river had run before the earthquakes rearranged everything. What was left was a peninsula of Kentucky territory, stranded on the far side of a hairpin river bend, surrounded on 3 sides by water and on the 4th by another state entirely. Tennessee and Kentucky argued over the land for years before Congress formally ratified the boundary in 1820. During the Civil War, this same stretch of river, then called Madrid Bend, became the site of the Battle of Island No. 10, a real military engagement fought over what was, at its core, a geographic accident nobody had intended to create. Today, Kentucky Bend is still a working farming community, quiet and flat, with fields running right up toward the river. It functions normally as part of Fulton County. Residents pay Kentucky taxes, vote in Kentucky elections, and send their kids to Kentucky schools. They simply can't drive there without a trip through another state first, along Tennessee Route 22, the only road in. There's a Kentucky welcome sign out there, standing in the middle of what looks, from every direction, exactly like Tennessee. Number 7, the Northwest Angle, Minnesota. The part of America you can only reach through Canada. This is the only part of the lower 48 states north of the 49th parallel, and you cannot legally drive there without first crossing into another country. The mistake happened in 1783 during negotiations for the Treaty of Paris, the agreement that ended the Revolutionary War. British and American negotiators were working from a map of Lake of the Woods that assumed the lake was a simple oval. The treaty specified that the border should run to the lake's northwesternmost point. The actual lake is nothing like an oval. It's a sprawling maze of bays and islands, and its real northwesternmost point sat well north of where anyone expected, on a finger of land surrounded by Canadian territory. Rather than redraw the entire border, both countries eventually just accepted the anomaly. It was formalized under a joint boundary commission in 1925. The result is a roughly 120 square mile pocket of Minnesota that shares a land border only with the Canadian province of Manitoba. To reach it by road, you drive through Canada, then check in with U.S. Customs at an unstaffed video phone booth locals call Jim's Corner. There's no fence, no guard, just a shed with a phone. Beyond it is dense boreal forest and a lake so large and irregular it swallows entire islands whole, which is exactly the kind of geography that caused this mess in the first place. The only alternative is crossing Lake of the Woods itself, by boat in summer, or occasionally by ice road once the lake freezes solid enough to drive across. In 2021, a U.S. senator had to formally petition the State Department after Canadian pandemic border restrictions cut Angle residents off from their own homes. And in an earlier dispute over fishing regulations, residents half-jokingly floated the idea of seceding to Canada entirely, a standoff locals still call the Great Walleye War. It never actually got anywhere near secession, but the fact that it was said out loud, even as a joke, says something about how strange it feels to live in a piece of your own country that your own country can barely reach. 100 or so people live here year-round, mostly running fishing resorts and lake lodges, on a piece of the United States that the United States itself can only reach by leaving the country first. Number 6, Bodie, California. The Gold Rush town frozen in time. Look through the windows of Bodie's abandoned homes today, and you'll see furniture, dishes, and stocked store shelves sitting exactly where their owners left them, decades ago. Gold was discovered near Bodie Bluff in 1859 by a prospector named W.S. Bodie, who died in a snowstorm that same winter and never saw the town that would carry his name. Bodie stayed a minor mining camp for almost 2 decades until an 1875 mine strike triggered a full boomtown explosion. By 1879 and 1880, estimates put the population somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people, spread across more than 2,000 buildings, with around 65 saloons keeping the miners entertained. The boom collapsed almost as fast as it arrived. Census records show the population dropping from over 5,000 in 1880 to just 122 people by 1940. Mining stopped for good in 1942. Here's what makes Bodie different from most ghost towns. In 1962, California's state park system made a deliberate decision. Rather than restore the buildings or let them collapse, they would freeze the town exactly as it stood. The policy has an official name: arrested decay. Structures get stabilized, never renovated. Two major fires in 1892 and 1932 already destroyed most of the original town before that policy even existed. So what survives is a small fraction of what once stood. At over 8,300 feet elevation, winters here are brutal, and the final stretch of road into town is unpaved gravel, sometimes impassable for months at a time. The Standard Mill still stands, along with rows of weathered storefronts on what used to be Main Street, and in the off-season the only sound out there is wind moving through empty buildings and creaking wood. Bodie is now an active California State Historic Park. There's no food, no gas, no lodging on site, just the buildings themselves, over 100 of them, kept in exactly the state of collapse they were in on the day everyone left. It's the rarest kind of ghost town, one that survived not despite its decay, but because of it. If you're finding this list interesting so far, drop a thumbs up. Let us know in the comments which of these places you'd actually want to visit and which one you'd stay far away from. We read every comment. And if you think a frozen gold rush town is strange, wait until you hear what happened to the next one on this list, because this is where the tone starts to shift. Number 5. Bombay Beach, California. The California Riviera that poisoned itself. In the 1950s and 60s, this stretch of desert shoreline drew more annual visitors than Yosemite National Park. Members of the Rat Pack reportedly showed up. Today, Bombay Beach sits 223 feet below sea level, officially the lowest community in the United States, with a population of 231. None of this was supposed to exist in the first place. In 1905, an irrigation canal project on the Colorado River failed catastrophically, and floodwater poured unchecked into a below-sea level desert basin for roughly 2 years before engineers finally sealed the breach. What they left behind was the Salton Sea, an accidental inland lake in the middle of the desert with no natural outlet. For a few decades, that didn't matter. The Salton Sea became a genuine resort destination, and Bombay Beach was its flagship beach town. Then the math caught up with it. With no outlet, evaporation steadily concentrated agricultural runoff and salt in the water until the lake turned toxic. Beginning in the 1970s and 80s, fish and bird die-offs became catastrophic, and the resulting stench drove away tourists and residents alike, almost as fast as they had arrived. The population collapsed. Bombay Beach spent decades as a near-ghost town, a scattering of abandoned trailers and collapsing motels along a poisoned shoreline. Then in 2011, artists started moving in. The Bombay Beach Biennale now turns the town's abandoned lots and derelict structures into outdoor installation art every year, drawing a new kind of visitor back to the shore. In 2026, state and federal agencies committed $250 million toward restoring the Salton Sea, and property values are already starting to climb in response. Some longtime residents worry the same revival that saved the town could eventually push out the artists and eccentrics who kept it alive in the first place. The highway sign welcoming you into town still lists the population using outdated census numbers. Locals will tell you the real figure is lower. A resort town that once rivaled Yosemite for visitors, reduced to a shoreline of rust and salt, and somehow that's exactly what brought people back. Number 4. North Brother Island, New York. The island New York uses to forget. You can see this island from Bronx apartment windows and from planes landing at LaGuardia, and almost nobody who sees it knows what happened there. North Brother Island sits in the East River, about 20 acres of land between the Bronx and Rikers Island. New York City bought it in the 1880s for one specific reason. It was isolated enough to quarantine people with contagious diseases, far enough from the general population to feel safe. Construction on Riverside Hospital began in 1885, built to house patients with smallpox, typhus, and tuberculosis. In June 1904, the excursion steamship General Slocum caught fire in the East River near the island, killing roughly 1,021 people. It remains the deadliest single disaster in New York City history before September 11, 2001. Survivors were brought to the island for treatment and the dead were laid out along its shore. 3 years later, the island gained its most famous resident. Mary Mallon, known to history as Typhoid Mary, was the first identified asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever in the United States. She worked as a cook, infecting families without ever showing symptoms herself. When health officials finally tracked her down in 1907, she resisted so hard that officials later described her as fighting like a caged animal. They forcibly restrained her and rowed her out to North Brother Island. She was released once, in 1910, on the condition that she never work as a cook again. She broke that condition under a false name, caused another outbreak, and was sent back to the island in 1915, this time for the rest of her life. She died there in 1938, having spent roughly 26 years total in quarantine. The island later served as veterans' housing and an adolescent drug rehabilitation center before finally being abandoned entirely in 1963. Vegetation has reclaimed almost everything since. Trees grow straight up through collapsed roofs, vines swallow entire stairwells, and from certain angles you can still see the Bronx skyline and the fencing of Rikers Island across the water. New York City close enough to touch, and completely unreachable at the same time. The island functions as a bird sanctuary now, so the loudest sound most days is birdsong, layered over the quiet lap of river water and the distant hum of a city that has mostly forgotten this place exists. It has been closed to the public ever since. Today it's managed by the New York City Parks Department, and the only way in is by boat, with a permit accompanied by a city representative. The old hospital wards are still standing, windows shattered, structurally unsafe, waiting for nobody in particular. An entire neighborhood's worth of tragedy, sitting in plain view of one of the busiest cities on Earth, and the city simply decided, decades ago, to let the birds have it instead. Number 3. Cairo, Illinois. The city that died from racism. Most abandoned American towns have an economic explanation. A mine closed, a railroad moved, a factory shut down. Cairo has one of those too, but it isn't the reason most historians point to first. Cairo sits at the exact confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, the southernmost city in Illinois, protected entirely by levees because it sits at the state's lowest elevation. For a genuine stretch of the 19th century, that location made it a real river and rail hub. Charles Dickens visited in 1842 and was reportedly so unimpressed that he used the town as the model for the nightmarish City of Eden in one of his novels. By the 1920s, Cairo's population had climbed toward roughly 15,000 people, with a substantial black population dating back to the Civil War era. That population faced escalating discrimination for decades, including a documented lynching in the town's history, the kind of history that doesn't show up on a historical marker, but shapes everything that comes after it. The breaking point came in 1967, when a young black soldier died in police custody under circumstances the black community did not accept. What followed wasn't a single riot. It was years of it. From 1967 to 1973, residents reported gunfire in the streets on more than 140 separate nights over a roughly 2-year stretch. Not organized crime, not a single uprising, but a sustained, low-grade armed conflict between factions of the same small town. Black residents organized as the United Front of Cairo and ran a sustained boycott of white-owned businesses. It was disciplined, coordinated, and it worked. Combined with bombings and shootings on both sides, the boycott slowly starved out the very businesses it targeted. By 1973, there was barely a downtown business left standing to boycott. The population never recovered. As of the 2020 census, Cairo has 1,733 residents, down roughly 90% from its historic peak. Rows of abandoned storefronts line the old downtown today, including the shuttered Gem Theater, sitting empty within sight of the rivers that once made this town matter. The humid river bottom climate and the constant threat of flooding haven't helped either, but they weren't what emptied the streets. Cairo is still an incorporated city today. People still live there, still run a park district, still maintain a handful of historic buildings behind those levees. But drive down its main streets, and you're driving through the physical remains of a town that didn't lose a war against nature or against industry. It lost a war against itself. Number 2. Picher, Oklahoma. America's most toxic ghost town. Some parents in Picher filled their children's sandboxes with waste from a lead and zinc mine because nobody in town yet understood that it was poison. Picher didn't grow slowly. In 1913, lead was discovered on a local farm, and the town exploded into existence almost overnight, eventually named for O.S. Picher, owner of the local lead company. By the 1920s, this stretch of northeastern Oklahoma was one of the richest lead and zinc mining fields in the world, supplying materials for both world wars. Estimates of the town's peak population range from roughly 14,000 to 20,000 people, depending on the source, at the absolute height of the boom. The same mining that built Picher also poisoned it, both literally and structurally. Decades of unrestricted underground excavation left the ground riddled with unstable shafts, honeycombed underneath the streets and houses. On the surface, mining waste known as chat piled up into artificial gray mountains, an estimated 178 million tons of it in roughly 30 mounds scattered in and around town, some of them towering several stories high. For years, kids treated those piles as a playground, riding bikes up and down the slopes. They even had a nickname for themselves, Chat Rats. Nobody understood the danger until it was almost too late. A 2005 study found a shockingly high proportion of Picher's children with toxic lead levels in their blood. One estimate put the number as high as 63%. In 1983, the federal government designated the area the Tar Creek Superfund site, one of the largest, most complicated cleanup projects in the country, and one that's still ongoing decades later. Then, in 2008, an EF4 tornado tore through what was left of the town, killing several residents and destroying much of what remained. For most of the holdouts who'd refused earlier government buyouts, it was the final straw. On September 1st, 2009, Picher's municipal government was officially dissolved and the town stopped existing as a legal place. A small number of residents stayed anyway. The last of them, a man named Gary Linderman, who ran the town's final surviving business, died in 2015, having outlasted the town itself. Today, a handful of people still live in and around the former town limits, even though it hasn't been an official municipality in over a decade. The chat piles are still there too, towering gray mounds visible from the highway long before the town itself comes into view, a landscape built entirely out of what was dug out from underneath it, and what that digging ultimately cost the people who lived on top of it. Number 1, Centralia, Pennsylvania. The town that's been on fire since 1962. Getting here means driving through a string of other Pennsylvania coal towns, already half empty themselves, past boarded storefronts and quiet main streets, before arriving at what looks, from a distance, like just another overgrown lot. You pull up to what looks, at first glance, like an ordinary overgrown field laid out in a grid. Streets with no houses on them. Driveways leading to empty lots, cracked and split by weeds. The air smells faintly of sulfur, and it takes a second before you notice it. Thin wisps of smoke, rising quietly out of cracks in the ground in the middle of what should just be dirt. In cold weather, the smoke shows up thicker, curling out of the frozen ground like something exhaling. There is no house fire here. No brush fire. What's burning is underneath you, and it has been burning since before most of the people watching this video were born. In May 1962, Centralia's Borough Council tried to clean up the town landfill the way, by some accounts, they had done before, by setting the trash on fire. This time, the flames found an unsealed gap into the network of abandoned anthracite coal mine tunnels running beneath the entire town. The fire caught a coal seam. It has never gone out. For years, officials tried to put it out anyway. Nothing worked because the mine tunnels gave the fire what amounted to an endless supply of fuel. Ground temperatures beneath parts of town were eventually measured at over 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The way the true scale of the fire was first discovered is almost as strange as the fire itself. A local gas station owner checked his underground fuel tank and found it running 100 degrees hotter than it should have been. Then came the sinkholes. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy nearly fell into one that opened suddenly beneath him. That incident, combined with mounting complaints of toxic gas and health problems, finally pushed state and federal officials to act. In 1983, the government funded a relocation program worth somewhere between $42 and $43 million. Around 500 buildings were bought and demolished. In 2002, the U.S. Postal Service revoked the town's zip code entirely, erasing it from the mail system. A handful of residents refused every buyout offer. They fought the state for years over the right to stay in their own homes, and in 2013, they won a legal settlement guaranteeing they could live out their lives there. Pennsylvania's Department of Environmental Protection estimates the fire could keep burning for another 100 years. As of the 2020 census, exactly 5 people live in Centralia. That makes it the least populated municipality in the entire state of Pennsylvania. A town, technically, of 5. What's left today is a strange kind of monument. A stretch of former Route 61, permanently closed and covered in decades of graffiti, running past nothing. Scattered foundations where houses used to stand. A couple of cemeteries still tended, sitting above ground that's still quietly on fire. The story is widely credited as the direct inspiration for the horror film Silent Hill, and if you've ever played it or seen it, you already understand the mood without needing a single additional detail. 64 years, underground. Right now, while you're watching this, somewhere beneath a quiet Pennsylvania hillside, the fire is still going. Nobody put it out. Nobody ever will. It's just going to burn until it's finished, on its own schedule, long after everyone currently alive has stopped paying attention. America is not just the cities everyone already knows. It's exclaves cut off by earthquakes, deserts named for aliens, and a town that's been burning for over 60 years without anyone able to stop it. Of everything on this list, Centralia stays with me the most. An entire town, still on fire, decades after everyone was told to leave. Which one surprised you the most? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for more forgotten corners of the country like these.